Doctor Who, Series 12, Episode 6, Praxeus. You know what's one of the funny things about this episode? There's a number of things that don't quite make sense on certain issues. Like, overall, it's okay, but there's some things that don't really make sense. Um, like, the, uh, the scientist lady,
Yeah.
why does she look human? Or does she look Time Lord?
Well, there are a
But
lot of alien species that share physical characteristics with humans,
yeah,
and a lot of that actually do look human.
yeah, but like
In
you'd
Earth,
figure it's sort of the Star Trek thing. There'd be some tell, like there'd be some physical characteristic that's not quite human, like pointy ears that she reveals, or she's got some sort of different thing.
Maybe she
But
has 5 nipples.
maybe.
okay, and you know
It
what?
could just be an internal deviation. Although the Big Finish has woven in a lore similar to Star Trek that involve a species that actually have been encountered in the unit audios, the Kanishi, who are these ancient godlike beings who created these seed ships that actually were the ones who created a lot of the alien races out there. And once they get to a certain point, either they advance to a point where they're like, all right, cool, or they wipe them out to restart again if they get to a certain point in the wrong direction. So she probably just is from Praxeus or whatever is from a race. I don't remember. Was Praxeus the name of the planet or the name of
That was the name of the disease. That was the name of the virus.
I forget what the planet was.
I don't think they mentioned it.
Their planet probably has the same external physical characteristics as humans.
Yeah, I mean that's possible, but it's just sort of, it's one of those. Wait a second, it's sort of a, but again, it's not complete. Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility because as we've been told by 10 or something, or I forget it was just 10 or something. No, you look Time Lord. And the other thing was, okay, so the gas masks, the gas mask people, why were they wearing those? I guess maybe to keep their own infection inside, but it's not like they were very well sealed.
Mm,
Well, I mean, we realized that the pathogen is more of a bloodborne thing, or it feeds off of the plastic, so the containment of it doesn't necessarily have to be airtight as long as it doesn't come into contact with anything containing plastic.
But
or it was just a writer's thing to make the bad guys look scary.
well, and to hide what the bad guys look
But
like
yeah.
until they wanted to make a big reveal. In which case, they start to look like Jim Hadar. I was like, yeah, when you saw the first one that was fully plasticed out, it just looked like they looked like Jim Hadar, like really
Yeah.
cheap level Jim Hadar, but the rejects from the Jim Hadar process.
Although my question is, with the pathogens, especially the first two, when they were like eaten away. I understand it metastasizes and yada yada, but not every cell in the human body is filled with plastic. Yes, there is plastic in our systems, in our blood, blah, 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 because of microplastics. Microplastics are not in every cell. So when they die, it would die, but it would not kill them that way. They would not just suddenly calcify.
Damn, I was hoping I was a living Barbie doll.
Well, that and the
You
thing.
would be more of a troll doll, I'm sorry.
True.
And the explosion is a little weird. But
Yeah. And why did it happen only when they were touched? Because you notice it didn't spread on Jamila, I think her name was, until they touched her. And the guy, they pulled him out of the water, and it wasn't until she touched him that it started to spread, and then he exploded. So what was it about the physical contact, not on the sores, mind you, but on the regular human skin that activated the transformation?
But it was like, oh, there is person nearby. I should explode now and infect them.
I understand that Chick did say that it's a smart pathogen, but I don't think it works that way. Although I did have another problem with the whole, he's not the first person to die that way today. Yeah, he was, because Jamila died after him.
Continuity problems.
Yeah, within the episode.
And
I actually did notes on this because, well, Sam. Also, I got plenty of screen caps for my Sam Bishop roleplay.
Of course you did.
yeah, and there's something else I was gonna.
I swear I've heard the name Praxeus before, but I don't know where.
I think it sounds like a drug. I wonder.
Praxeus is Praxeus, but Praxeus is the toxic chemicals that cause the celery to turn purple, and which is why the Fifth Doctor wore the celery on his lapel.
Oh.
Praxis.
Yeah.
Action practice, such as exercise or practice of an art, science, or skill. Customary practice or conduct. 2. Practical application of a theory. That's praxis. Oh, what else was there?
Also, I think it's just their way of techno-babbling.
Yeah, yeah, ooh, this sounds cool. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's like, we don't need to, just, it has to sound cool, and it has an X in it, so that's really good.
Yeah.
X's are good for sci-fi things.
Yeah. So, I did take notes. Jake getting fired for arresting somebody actually is a pretty common thing, because even as security, you're not allowed to manhandle people like that. And I'm surprised he didn't get arrested for that, because that is assault.
I
actually did have a manager who was fired for something a lot less physical. We had a shoplifter who was walking out of the store with a stolen bag from our store filled with other stuff that they had stashed from our store. And she didn't even touch the person. She just grabbed the bag and slid it off his arm as he's walking out. And she and all of that and the security people were all fired for it.
Ooh.
So, yeah, that tackling a guy for just one little item, I'm surprised he didn't get arrested. Also, the camping scene, I understand that feeling too well. I went camping with my cousin and aunt one time, and my aunt was snoring like a chainsaw, and I was wearing one of those like I had one of those thermal blankets, the really thin one, but it keeps in heat really well. But I was having difficulty getting comfortable, so I was moving around too much, and neither me or my cousin got any sleep. So I ended up leaving the tent early and just wandering around before dawn. Although I don't know how they managed to even camp out in that waste.
Yeah, or at least, like,
Why would they?
yeah, I mean, you couldn't, like, even just, like, a few feet away from it,
Yeah, like,
just like, oh, okay,
they,
well, there's nothing up the hill a little bit, so we'll just
yeah,
camp
like,
up there, not, like, right directly on the trash.
exactly. That was just disgusting.
Yeah.
But,
Although that talking cats in Ontario thing just shows her ADD. Like
which was,
this doctor is serious ADHD.
if they
Where,
would, if they would do it more consistently, that would be good. Like, it would
yeah,
actually be
but
good, like, you know,
I think they are starting to be a little more consistent with it, but their timing on it needs work. Like they're throwing in her ADD at totally the wrong points, which I get that does sometimes happen, but ADD still has you can still focus. And sometimes you get ultra focused, which is probably what would happen when your life is on the line or when somebody else's life is on the line and you're the doctor. I mean, look at 11. He was ADHD, but when it came down to it, he was
yeah.
like, okay, I'm going to focus.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. When 11 got serious, everybody kind of went for the brown pants.
Yeah,
It's like
but
if 11 is happy and smiling and dancing and cracking jokes, everything's good. The second 11 starts getting serious, go get the brown pants because something is definitely wrong.
yeah. But then she makes these dumb comments even in a crisis like, so that's why you smell like dead bird. I thought you changed your shower gel.
Which dead bird shower gel? Why would you
Yeah,
want to smell like dead bird?
that is just so cringe.
But yeah, I
Like
think
cringe.
yeah, if they wove it in more and more reasonable things and made her, the cat is fine. That is a
Yeah,
good sort of, I'm distracted by this thing over here that I thought was cool.
yeah,
That's a fezzes are cool sort of moment. Like,
yeah,
that's a talking cat there's a talking cat in Ontario that I'm still looking into, but like that's a fine thing to go off on. But it has to make sense why the doctor would be intrigued by it. A talking cat. Well, that's fairly
yeah,
interesting. And that's something that the doctor would be kind of. Ooh, that's not normal. I'm curious. The doctor would do that, but like thinking they'd gone with a dead bird shower gel, unless that at some point in history became a thing, like being smelling like a dead bird was a positive thing. But yeah,
maybe, yeah. That's maybe if they're trying to attract predators. I don't know.
yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Like it still has to make sense why the doctor would think that. Like to a certain extent,
Yeah,
even if it's a weird doctor sense, it still needs to make some form of logical following. But
yeah.
yeah,
Also, fun fact: that line, "Excuse me, but I'm not the fantasist." It's funny because Warren Brown actually voiced a character that was diagnosed as a fantasist in the Big Finish audio transference. Although he technically wasn't a fantasist, he was pretending to be a fantasist in order to try to vet Alex Kingston's character and see if she was in league with these like bad guys. But the first chapter of the story, he was assumed to be a fantasist. So,
And I find it interesting that they chose the Indian Ocean to be the place where all the plastic is, because like a lot of it's an interesting uh, sort of thing where if you look at where most ocean pollution plastics come from, it's mostly, I think, like all of them are all the rivers that these sort of things come off of are in like Asia, India, that sort of thing.
mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting doing it for a British audience. I guess suppose given it's in English already, that it'll get to um, India, and that will like, hey, you know,
Or they just did research on where the biggest collection, I forget what they're called, but the biggest ones of those are, and saw, well, there's Indian Ocean, or I think there's one in the Pacific or whatever, and they picked the one that would make the most sense, plus it allows them to have the most diversity of
yeah, it was very much the checklist was out. If it seemed like, um,
yeah, it gives them the diversity they needed for the story, because that way they can go, oh, we have Hong Kong, we have Madagascar, we have Peru, all within this range. So, we can do a story with a bunch of different locales, and it makes it a nice mix up, as opposed to one that's closer to one location, and so they're kind of stuck in one area. It's not as big of an adventure.
yeah. Okay, why is this not?
Also, I really, really didn't like that girl.
Oh, the traveling.
Pissed. Yeah, two girls. At least you recognize me. No,
No.
two girls running. Never seen it. What's wrong with you people? It's like, dude, you're like a YouTuber. Just because you're a YouTuber doesn't mean everybody knows you. I don't know half these people that people on Twitter are like talking about, like, who the fuck is Markiplier? I don't know. I've never watched him. I don't care to watch him or her or them. I'm assuming it's a he. Or Pew Pew or whatever his name is. I don't know. I don't care.
PewDiePie, you mean?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Point is, who cares? Although I think that's kind of the point they were trying to make, and they made her a bit of a caricature of that. I mean, even to the point of, she's been friends with this chick for 5 years. They've been all over the world by it, and by the end of the episode, she's totally over it. She's like, hey, I'll tag along with you two on your honeymoon. I'll vlog it for you. I mean, she makes the doctor seem less annoying. She makes the doctor's like emotional ADD seem less like conspicuous. Also, just because Graham has seen and had IVs done to him before does not make him an expert in doing that. And I don't know if I would trust
Yeah.
him, somebody who doesn't even know anything about doing an IV, to do the IV.
Yeah. It's it's the same as the like they all became, engineering experts at running this alien ship in like that long. It's like
Yeah, it's how do you know how to put okay, I understand she explained how to do it, and I can kind of like the astronaut, I would assume had gotten the hardest part because he knows about it. He's been trained for that. But I mean, most of that seems kind of out of their experience levels.
Yeah. And then the police officer, the ex-police officer, though to be fair, it was the controls apparently were extremely simple. It's up,
Yeah,
down, left, and
down,
right.
left, right. It's like, God, your job is easy.
Yeah, like his is actually somewhat believable in that he only had to hit up. Like,
Yeah,
I want
he's
to go
like,
up and I want to go over there. And
yeah,
it's
he's
like,
like, so these are the controls, right? Up, down, left, right.
that's it.
Yeah. Wait. Oh
That's
my God, how did you?
yeah. But yeah, all the rest of it didn't make sense. But
Yeah,
yeah, if the doctor went around, just and they didn't even have to get the companions involved in that. The doctor could have just gone and you know, if they wanted to shorten it up, just have the doctor sonic screwdriver the settings the way she wants them, and then just set
it
it off.
it
And
could have been like I was helping my quote unquote helping my nephew bake muffins today, which technically I was the one doing it, but I was like, okay, you can help me by doing that and giving them the easiest things to do and like walking them through it as they're doing it. And then they just cut to, oh, we did it. You had us push a button. I did it. Yay. It could have been that just to incorporate the companions.
yeah, but
I mean, the doctor is very prone to do that too. I was just watching an episode, which is one of the least popular ones, but I still was watching it anyways. And I mentioned, I'm watching Time Lash, and they're like, oh, my condolences. I'm like, hey, it's a classic episode. It should be watched too. But
not to be confused with Time Crash.
yeah, not to be confused with Time Crash. But yeah, he's um not his actual companion, but a stowaway. He was who happened to be H.G. Wells. He was like, you look at that screen over there and tell me the numbers that pop up. This screen? And the doctor goes over there. He's like, well, how many screens do you see in front of you? Just the one. So which screen do you think? Because the doctor was,
But
but I
uh,
mean, I did like banter in this episode between like Ryan and Graham, and they did actually start giving Yaz a bit of personality, like a bit of self, a sense of self, instead of just being the doctor's sidekick, just there. They actually started giving her something to do and giving her initiative.
well,
Her,
and the thing is, like she sends Yaz and the YouTuber into the thing. It's like, really? It's an obviously dangerous situation. You're just gonna leave them for an hour?
yeah,
Like,
uh,
you could achieve a lot of the same goals by, like, Yaz, accidentally while running, accidentally hits the teleport pad and ends up where she ends up anyway, and you would have got that whole thing done without having the doctor just leave a companion and sort of a new person just like, oh yeah, we're gonna leave you with this place that had guns and masked people and whatnot. It's like,
well, I mean, they thought all the masked people were dead.
Well, I mean, it's still like more could come, but
True, but
you don't know how many they have. And
it,
if it went
I
silent,
feel
you
like
don't know
she,
how much they have in terms of technology to get back there and figure out what went
but
wrong.
but
So,
I mean, she also was very insistent. Like she,
well, if I had a dog that wanted to, that insisted on eating chocolate, I would be like, no, you do not get to eat chocolate because that is dangerous for you. That is bad for you. I'm going to put it up here where you can't get it. Like, I know, but like, when we're talking about the doctor, we're talking about someone who is supposed to be so intellectually superior to humans that it would be like to a child. Like, her companions are children to her. Like, in terms
okay,
of,
first of all, I let my nephew do a lot of things he probably shouldn't.
yeah, but like, she should be going like, okay, yeah, this is acceptable, this is not. Like, leaving you here, no. And like the weapon that the guy uses to hit uh the two aliens that, you know, it's
She's
like
also
she
a
throws it
cop.
down. It's like, okay, but like it's
So
like that's
I
a
mean,
really odd thing to, it's a sort of a weird thing to happen in Doctor Who, because usually the heroes never use weapons.
well, the
And
heroes
even
don't.
the doctor isn't making a statement about the weapons, is just like, put it down. And it's just like, okay, but like, you're not gonna say anything about it. It's like, no, just put it down. Okay. It's like, okay, whatever. But it still would have, from a
Did
strategic
get out of his
viewpoint,
head.
it's like that would have been a fine thing to keep around. Just, like the Joe Martin doctor, if nothing else, as a means of sort of mad to try and keep them from firing on you. It's like, I'm armed, don't fire, let's talk. I'm not going to actually use it, but I'm going to have it so that if you try, I'm at least armed enough to protect myself. But
This doctor is a lot more of a puppy than the other
mm,
incarnations. She doesn't seem as developed, and I don't mean like personality wise, although there is part of that. I mean, she is more of a child than any of the other doctors. Even 11, who was a perpetual ADD preteen.
yeah, well, he was just a big nerd. That was his
But,
deal. Like, he was just a
yes,
massive nerd. Like,
but this one is just, she's a little kid.
yeah, she's little childish in some regards. Yes, yeah. 11 was
In
just a big
most
nerd,
regards.
and in fact, sometimes he acted really, really old. He was like, you know, you could see him sort of feel his age at points, but like a lot of times he was just a big nerd, and that was all it was. Like, in the best possible way, was he a big friggin' nerd? Like, I
Calling her
mean
a
that with
bad,
no
words are,
derogatory tones to that at all.
there is no way to be, for it to be bad being called a nerd. So, excuse you.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just, oh, you calling him, a big nerd? It's like, no, no, no. That is said with the most
There
affection I can muster. Like,
there
he's
is
a
no
big.
way there is no way I can find the term nerd insulting.
Some
Like I
people will,
have
but
huh?
some people will. Although, well,
Yeah,
you can't
well,
call him that because there's enough people that just so thin-skinned that you could. "Oh, that's an insult." It's like, no, I really mean it
uh,
in the best,
dude,
most compassionate, most admirable way I
okay.
can put on
People
there.
have called people have called me a nerd attempting to insult me, and I say thank you. Because called a nerd is the biggest compliment you can give.
Yeah. Anyway,
But
Praxeus.
yes,
Uh,
Warren Brown's acting was superb, even though,
which one is he?
Sam Bishop.
Well, no, I mean
The
which one of the
cop.
characters? The cop.
Yeah,
Okay.
cop.
Um,
He was like a giant puppy dog.
well, yeah,
But
it's just like
he had so much of a range, especially for a character that says I don't do emotions, and yet through the entire episode he has the most emotional range, even more so than the main cast. Although that's not hard.
yeah, and one sort of thought that occurred to me that was kind of funny was okay, so his ship, like they got him off the ship, so or how is he going to explain? Oh yeah, I was fine. I was in Hong Kong. I was abducted by aliens for a bit. I got really sick, and then I got better because another alien came and cured me. So, it's like,
I think
okay.
they're gonna just skip that and say he he washed up in wherever, probably in Madagascar. His his ship got detoured and he crashed in the ocean, Indian Ocean, and he washed up on Madagascar because that's where they left him. And so he called his hubby to come get him.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
probably the closest thing to facts that could be mustered and still be believed.
yeah, it's just like the ESA is gonna go. Wait a second. What you called your husband instead of just calling us to let us know that you're okay? Like I'm him, yes, obviously, but maybe call us as well to let us know that you're okay. It's like, but yeah, that was probably
He
that
did
probably
have
left a
an
few head scratchers over at the European Space Agency. It's like
he might have called them in that interim after the
after he's
doctor,
cured, but
after he was cured, and they picked up Jake and then they dropped him back off. And it's like, as he's changing, he's like, shit, I gotta call ET, gotta phone home.
yeah, I gotta let him know because there's probably still big ships out there in the Indian Ocean, wherever
Yeah,
he was supposed to land, and they're all still looking for me.
yeah,
I probably should tell them that I'm fine. I'm in Madagascar. They confused, but they'll at least know I'm okay. And
yeah.
they'll stop searching. They'll send the ships home. It's like, no, I'm fine. I'm in Madagascar. It's like, okay. um, but I mean, it had its minor problems, but this was another middle of the road sort of. It wasn't oh my goodness, I need to watch this again right now sort of episode, but it wasn't.
I did, but that's because I needed screen caps.
Oh yeah, I mean, but for entertainment
Especially,
purposes.
yes, especially since now I can role playing as Sam. I can be like, haha, it's good. I got in the TARDIS first.
And that whole identity was him undercover.
Hey, it wouldn't be the first time Sam's gone undercover. And who knows, maybe he does have a husband somewhere. We don't know that much about him. I mean, aside from the fact that his mother was a teacher and his father was an accountant.
Yeah. Like yeah, or both of them were unit agents, and this whole thing was a big unit operation that went south. And he's had to sort of fool the doctor. It's like, no, 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 I'm not Sam Bishop.
I mean, she's never met Sam, and I mean, he's still even technically, though unit has been disbanded in the UK, he's still active because he is one of the roamers. He is one of the ones who travel, and he doesn't have a home base, so to speak. So
But
he wouldn't have to have been, transplanted to a different HQ because he didn't really have a central HQ.
but yeah, it was. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's. I mean, I think we've been sort of conditioned with how bad some of these episodes have been. That like, even if it's just an okay episode, it seems a lot better than it is because you have something to compare it to. But
Although that that explains why they were like, we're married, we're separated. They needed to get their stories straight.
yeah, that would explain why why
It's like,
all the story didn't why any inconsistencies in their story is just because they were both undercover agents pretending to be a married couple and they didn't have their stories exactly straight, so they
yeah,
haha
because like
straight. Yeah.
he was a unit operative on the space station, and Sam was trying to track him down to rescue him, but because he was undercover on the space station, he couldn't just go, "Oh, I got to rescue him." And the whole thing at the beginning was Sam was trying to track down some sort of alien tech, and that's why he was working at that grocery store or whatever it was. Headcanon accepted.
That was Sam Bishop. He's just undercover.
Yes.
You don't really know.
Deep
Yeah.
undercovers.
Well, that's for the honeymoon.
Yeah, this was a
I
not
think
completely incompetent episode. Like it.
I think the only truly bad episode this season was Orphan 55.
They've all had like truly bad. Like we've had a lot of mediocre.
I
We
mean,
had
they've
we
all
had
been at least good, but I mean, except for Orphan 55, that was the 42 slash Love and Monsters slash.
oh Love and Monsters. Oh god.
Yeah, that Orphan 55 was that.
Well,
The terrible episode.
yeah. If and like we were saying before we started, this season has also had the problem of being basically earthbound.
Yeah, being Earthbound, and the fact that they're still stuck working off of the crap base that they were given to begin with. Last series, they have to build off of last series, and they can't just suddenly reboot it all, keeping the same characters, because unless the Doctor regenerated, which she isn't doing, they can't suddenly change her character overnight.
Yeah, they have
She's
to.
they have to build her up to it. Like they have to phase in or phase out things. Like the Seventh Doctor, he started out being all like his main characteristic at the beginning, right after regeneration, the first few episodes with him or stories with him, he was one of those. You remember Ziva, how she was always messing up quotes, messing up paraphrases, common phrases,
Yeah.
like that, where he was like, you know what they say, time and tide melt the snowman. That's wait on no man. Who's waiting? I'm leaving. That was the Seventh Doctor at the beginning, but slowly they phased him out of that. They have to phase her personality, otherwise it would become too jarring, and even if they make her amazing, it would still be jarring.
Yeah, it
So,
starts with. I think it just basically starts with that they didn't really solidify who this Doctor was before they started. and
Yeah.
and
So now they
so
have
they didn't have
her.
a really hard and firm way of doing this, and you know, and on top of that, they didn't really they got real preachy in the first season. They still have gotten preachy occasionally this season, but
But at least they've learned their mistake about how to preach. Like this episode could be considered preachy, but they incorporated their preachiness into the story.
yeah,
And
it's
they
better.
support
It's not as
it.
bad as Orphan 55 because Orphan 55 was on top of it was a bad episode to begin with, and then they preached
Yeah,
on top of it. The
yeah,
preaching is woven into the episode.
yeah.
It's a little preachy, but not as bad as Orphan 55. Like Orphan
And
55 was bad. This
and
was
the preachiness wasn't just this is bad. You know, it was more telling the story and letting you see for yourself as opposed to just shoving it in your face and saying like taking a dog and shoving its face in its own piss, you know?
mm.
That's what Orphan 55 was. Orphan 55 was, you're a bad dog. Look what you did. You know, newspaper and shoving its face in the piss. This one, it's more of, you see what you've done, you know?
but
And it's still kind of scolding and it's still kind of, uh, you know what? You're fucked. But at this point, it's more of,
yeah, and there's not a lot of people. And well, and to be fair, there's not a lot that the British or American people can really do for it to a certain extent because a lot of it is like China and Asia and Africa. Like the Yangtze dumps a lot of it in,
yeah.
and so
Although I
putting
thought it,
pressure on them is fine, but like though India is English speaking, so they'll actually be able to watch the episode straight. So that might you know, but yeah, there's
although I do have to say, um, I found it kind of funny because one of the solutions they have been looking at for not so much the microplastic issue, but for like oil spills and petroleum based
is a bacteria
pollution.
modified to consume it,
Exactly. So they're basically saying, hey, look what happens if you fuck this up.
but
Which was, I don't know if that was an intended thing, but it was kind of an amusing aside, you know?
what it would have been an interesting thing to do would have been, and she kind of referenced it, but like if behind this whole thing was the Autons.
I know. Well, I
It,
don't think it would have been the Autons, although I think it would have been it is an awesome storyline where the Autons are using our own pollution against us.
yeah, and that would have
I
been an
mean,
interesting thing, like the disease. If the disease had made you into an Auton and then like they stopped it, that was the way they did it, or if or if they just had like they cut a little bit of they cut the whole scene with them going back to the warehouse, cut that whole scene out, and insert a scene at the end where it's uh, it's
the nesting consciousness.
Esteem consciousness, yeah, and it's them first plan failed, but results promising, and then bring them back later doing that, turning you know you know uh, first test results failed, but next result the next wave has been created and it will be better suited to achieve our goals.
Or because, the Autons are an alien race and the aliens could have created the Praxeus as a way to combat the Autons.
That's
And
another,
it
yeah.
got out of control and landed up here. And because there aren't any Autons anymore, except for Josh, uh, it could start eating people. Although I think poor Josh would have it the worst in this case because he actually is full of plastic.
But
Uh,
yeah, there's lots of interesting ways they at least noted it. Well, something weird with plastic, maybe the autons, and then she sort of dismisses it immediately. But that would have been a funny thing to do for maybe not this season, this series, but maybe since they're getting a 13th series, a third series for this, the next series they bring it back, and that was actually the first part of them, and they come back on a later thing, and it was like, oh yes, that was the first. But then again, doing that, they really need. If they were going to do that, they needed to do it this episode because,
yeah,
then you're just doubling down on the same message, and that's really going to irritate people. Like it
yeah.
would have been great as that would have been a really interesting finale, like 2-part finale, like
Mm-hmm.
where
Or even
it's
just a 2-part episode inside the season.
yeah,
But,
like they used to do, like they used to have multi-parters, but
mm-hmm.
yeah, like Praxeus Part 2, and then it's you know you have all them working with it, and you get that extra little auton tie-in, and that would be a really cool way of doing it. But yeah, this is, and autons aren't like they're particularly expensive to do. It's like
Yeah.
they're mannequins essentially. It's
Yeah,
like
they're just mannequin heads.
yeah, and hands to a certain extent on some of them
But
because yeah,
the
they have to do the whole. They have to do the whole. Some of them like open up and fire, so you have to
but
do that with them.
they already have those. They've had them since the 70s.
Yeah,
So I
and
mean,
they used them in rows, so if they still hold
exactly.
on to everything, which the BBC, I can't imagine they'd ever like stuff gets put in long term storage. It doesn't get thrown away, I imagine.
Especially not Doctor Who related stuff.
Yeah, like I think they learned their lesson with with losing the film from the missing episodes. It's like
From the
yeah,
60s,
we no
yes.
longer do that.
Yeah, but
We keep
I
everything in pintuplet. And that's just
another
us.
another good villain for this episode could have been the Sea Devils. A plan of the Sea Devils to try to combat the plastic in the oceans.
And it didn't quite work the way they
It
wanted
got
it
out of
to.
control, yeah. And instead of just trying to break down the plastics, it went and started attacking everybody because they didn't quite realize just how severe that plastic was.
Yeah. There's lots of interesting things like that they could have trimmed here, trimmed there, and stuck something interesting in as a plot, or do it as a 2-parter, as a big series finale or something. But anyway, um, yeah,
It was at least well written as far as the story itself. It was well acted by the guests. The main cast, I mean, Ryan and Graham, still good. Yes, her acting is pretty flat. Especially in this episode, in my opinion. Like that scene where she's like, "I gotta go back." There was no sense of urgency at all. Like it was so flat to me. Like I want to like Yaz. I mean, I'm trying, but the it's just so hard to. And I appreciate that they're finally giving her an attempt at a personality, and like she's actually using her police persona. She's kind of going Gwen Cooper here, but she's still so flat about it.
Yeah, but to be fair, Graham is the greatest of them all.
Oh, love Graham.
yeah.
I love the Ryan Graham uh, banter. I love it in this. I love it in general. I love like the thing where it's like, uh, hang on a second. I'm not full of plastics. You're full of something.
I still think, like, and I'll say this a few times, but like, I think they should have followed the pattern that New Who has done in general. Like, they pick one companion. They sort of introduced. They might have mildly introduced the second companion, like they did with Mickey. They should have picked one of them and done a Mickey with it, and just like, okay, she
You
picks
wanted
one
them
of them to
to
have as the main one. Introduces the other one. The main one goes with her the first time. Then the other one comes in afterwards. That way, you only have the Doctor and one companion, so you have for a couple episodes to really build up who those characters are, and then
aside
bring in
from
more of them because they just
aside aside from the very first episode, that is what they've always done. If
yeah
they had multiple companions, they have always had an overlap. Like when they got rid of Susan, then came Vicky, and they still had Ian and Barbara. And
yeah
when Ian and Barbara left, um they got Steven, and so
yeah
they staggered it. I don't think uh, any of them had just suddenly appear with multiple companions.
yeah because even ten started with multiple companions that he was fairly often seen with, but he had Rose and he had Mickey and he had Captain Jack, but they were all introduced under 9, so you were just learning about 10. 11 made a
Hmm.
clear break, but they did the Rose and Mickey situation again.
Yeah,
Amy
they
went with
had
him, Rory
and
stayed,
they
and then eventually
yeah.
Rory came along later.
Hmm.
And all the
Yeah.
other 10 companions were like, okay, this companion left. Okay, well, we got a new companion. And he'd already set up 10, so it didn't really matter, but you still usually only had about one, maybe two with them at any given time. Like Martha Jones, pretty much just Martha Jones. Uh,
Yeah.
my favorite, name's escaping me.
Donna
Donna
Noble.
Noble. Donna Noble, yes. She
How
was
can you
basically
forget
alone
Donna?
for the most part.
The fact that you have two aunts named Donna. Uh, but Donna Noble is best companion. Like
Oh, yeah, I mean,
best
obviously. And then
best new
11,
companion,
11,
because Jamie Sherman is best companion in overall. But best new Who companion is definitely Donna.
yeah. And then 11, they did the Rose and Mickey situation. You start with
Yep.
one, and then you add the other. You introduce the other, but you don't bring him along at first. And then a few episodes down the line, you bring the other one along, and then they travel
And that's
together for a while. And we got once we had those built up, then we got River, you know.
yeah.
And so 11's built
What
up
it
over
means
time,
to
and
us
then
over
and then
time, but
when they all
became
left, you ended up with Clara, which was only one. So and then,
and,
well, then you had Danny Pink, but he came along much later.
yeah, and he wasn't a real companion.
Yeah,
He never um all, and then they did have Nardole and Bill, but they introduced Nardole and then brought in Bill
yeah.
and then
Eh,
brought in Misty.
And Nardal didn't have a very big personality. He was basically.
I love
Oh,
Nardole.
I'm not saying bad. I'm not saying anything bad
Yeah.
about Nardal. I'm just saying that he wasn't particularly well developed. He was just sort of,
He had
he
a
was
big personality. He didn't have a big backstory.
okay. Well, what I was trying to get at was he wasn't, it didn't take a lot of development to figure out Nardal.
He was basically Uncle Fester
Yeah, to a certain extent. Less gross, but yeah.
without the light bulbs
But
and with
yeah.
invisible hair.
But yeah, and we had uh,
Bill.
Bill, but yeah, but yeah, she was. It was two. It was, and it didn't need a lot. Nardal didn't need a lot of development to figure out. Okay, that's Nardal. He doesn't need a lot of development to figure out who Nardal is. And then
Yeah,
you brought him in.
he had that doctor type personality where first episode you knew who he was.
Yeah,
You
well,
know?
what a good doctor should be is
Yeah.
like and the funny thing was 10 didn't even need his full episode to tell you who he was. He spent about 10 minutes at the end of it just blabbering on for 10 minutes, and then he fought the um brains blanking. But he fought the villain of his introductory episode, and then took him out with a Satsuma. It's like, okay, yeah, okay. We I think we've got a pretty good feel as to what 10's gonna be like. 11, oh my goodness, that
It took
was
him 10 seconds to figure out who he was.
yeah, yeah. Get a girlfriend.
I swear, all it took was the fish fingers and custard scene, and it's like, oh, we know who he is.
Yeah, he's
Freaking ADHD.
and like constantly flitting about his arms, and it's
Yeah.
like, can you
He's
talk
Jack
without
Sparrow.
flapping your arms about?
Oh my gosh,
Yes.
he's Jack Sparrow.
No.
He is what Jack Sparrow would be sober.
Yeah, if Jack Sparrow was sober and a genius, it's like, yeah, to a certain extent. Except he's not quite as
Jack was
Casanova-y.
Jack was pretty clever. He just hit it very well.
But
Not
like,
that
but
Jack.
but between in a chess match, like, but yeah, but yeah, 11. You got to know him fairly quickly in his first episode, and you had Amy for like the first little bit. That it was just him and Amy, so you really got to know those two characters, and then they kind of gave you a sprinkling of what Rory was going to be like, and then they brought Rory in, and then we had Rory in there, and then eventually we had River once they'd really built up the pawns, and I kind of feel for Rory because I can't help but call them the pawns because
Yeah, same here. But I mean, even he admits it. He's like, yeah, she's the man of the relationship.
But yeah, you kind of feel for Rory. But if I say the pawns, you know who I'm talking about.
I mean, one of my favorite jokes is, after the Angels take Manhattan, how much did the doctor cry?
2 pawns.
Enough to fill a river and 2 ponds.
Oh.
God. No. No.
But yeah, I'm curious.
There were a couple of other lines in this that I'm just like face palming. Like Graham said, did she say brains plural? Is that just an American thing where they say brains as in plural? Like you don't have the brains for that? Like,
I don't know.
I mean, you use it that way, right? Or am
Yeah,
I
I think so.
weird?
Thinking about it on the spot, but yeah, I think so. It's like, I think, but then again, it's one of those things where the doctor's so weird that he's just like, she could be just using it like that, but she could also have 2 brains. Like, she's an alien, she's weird, and she's super smart.
Yeah,
So
but I mean, it's used so arbitrarily. Like using brains as term for intelligence doesn't mean you have multiple brains.
yeah, but with the doctor, he wasn't quite sure.
Yeah.
He was like, is she
Oh,
using that literally or just, sort of figuratively? Because I think don't they know that she has 2 hearts?
yeah, and the fact that, she was once a guy.
Yeah, so her anatomy is weird as is, so, the fact that, she might have multiple brains is not out of the question.
It just depends if they're inside her or in a bunch of jars.
Ah.
Yeah, but I don't think she'd be talking to them when they're not present, if that were the case.
She does have a hand in a jar.
Not anymore.
No,
And that was Jack's hand in a jar.
What? No, that was 10's hand in a jar.
And jar that was owned by Jack. Jack put the doctor's hand in a jar.
Yeah, and then the hand became the
Yeah.
Metacrisis doctor.
Yeah. Also, another thing, how did neither Ryan nor Graham know what a pathogen is? Don't you learn that in, like, grade school?
Yeah, you'd think that would be, you know...
Especially Graham, who has medical conditions, and he must have been immunocompromised at least during his chemo. So how would he not know what a pathogen is?
Yeah, is it just an excuse to have her explain it?
Yeah, but still, like, I would understand if Jake didn't know what a pathogen is, because he seemed a little more of a musclehead than an actual smart person.
Yeah, it's fairly obvious where the brains and where the brawns are in that relationship.
Exactly. Which, I mean, it did make the Who Found Who a little better, because if the astronaut was searching for, if Adam were searching for Jake, it would be a little more difficult. I mean, not because it would be harder for him to find him, but because I don't know if Jake would have managed to text him, first of all, to search for him. Also, he's probably not as much of a fighter as Jake. I mean, physical fighter. But yeah, I mean, if Jake were the one who didn't know what a pathogen was, that would be more believable. But Graham and Ryan's grandmother was a nurse. How do they, who are most connected to the medical field, not know what a pathogen is?
Yeah. Whatever at this point. It's just like, okay. It was trying to teach the kids what a pathogen was. That's what I'm going with. And they needed somebody to not know what it was, and they just chose them. Um, but anyway, so we covered that. Just going middle checklist. I can't think of anything else I really have to say. It was an okay episode. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it wasn't atrocious. Um, uh, but yeah, it's nothing. It's not Blink, but it's not Orphan 55 or Arachnids in the UK.
Yeah.
But okay, well, is any other final thoughts before I wrap this one?
No,